The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the asphalt of Miller County when Detective Nora Taylor first saw Pinewood Prison. The massive concrete building towered over the scorched fields like a gray monolith, swallowing up all hope. It was early July, and even at 8 in the morning the thermometer read 32 degrees. Nora wiped the sweat from her forehead and headed for the main entrance. She was about to conduct a routine inspection following an anonymous complaint about the conditions in which the prisoners were being held. Ray Coleman met her in the lobby with a professional smile. The 45-year-old man with neatly trimmed hair and a firm handshake gave the impression of someone who was completely in control. A senior guard badge gleamed on his chest, a position he had held for the past 5 years after 18 years of service at Pinewood. "Detective Taylor, welcome to our facility," Ray said, leading her down the hallway. "I must say we are proud of how we run things here. We have one of the lowest violation rates in the state." Nora nodded, mentally noting how carefully rehearsed his words sounded. In her 12 years on the police force, she had learned to recognize people who tried too hard to impress. The prison corridors were surprisingly clean, but even the powerful air conditioning system couldn't completely overcome the summer heat and the distinctive smell of sweat, fear, and disinfectant. In Block C, they stopped at cell number 247. Behind the bars sat a man of about 34, reading a well-thumbed book. Marcus Gray looked up, intelligent brown eyes in a thin face framed by dark hair that he was clearly trying to keep tidy in prison conditions. "He's one of our model prisoners," Ray explained, lowering his voice. "A history teacher. He ended up here for a fatal car accident. Manslaughter, 8 years. He's in his 3rd year." Marcus didn't look up from his book, but Nora noticed his shoulders tense at the mention of the crime. She knew his story. On that rainy October night, he was driving home from a parent-teacher conference when a 10-year-old boy ran out into the road. Braking on the wet asphalt didn't help. The child died in the hospital 3 days later. Marcus turned himself into the police without even trying to hide what had happened. "Mr. Gray," Nora said to him, "how are you feeling?" Marcus slowly raised his head. His eyes showed the exhaustion of a man who struggles daily with guilt. "I'm surviving, Detective," he replied quietly, "trying not to cause any trouble." "He really doesn't," Ray quickly added. "He helps out in the library and runs educational programs for other inmates. A real example of rehabilitation." Nora noticed a slight irritation in Marcus's voice when Ray spoke about him in the 3rd person, as if he weren't there. But the man said nothing, only lowered his eyes back to his book. The tour continued. In the medical wing, they were met by Dr. James Park, a short man of Asian descent with kind eyes behind glasses. 52 years old, 20 years as a prison doctor after a private practice. Nora immediately sensed an ally in him, a man who genuinely cared about people. "Dr. Park provides top-notch medical care," Ray said again. "We have excellent statistics on inmate health." "We do our best," the doctor replied modestly, but Nora detected a note of tension in his voice. "Although the summer heat creates additional problems, some inmates don't tolerate the heat well." "What are the most common complaints you hear?" Nora asked. Dr. Park hesitated for a moment, glancing quickly at Ray. "The usual things. Colds, minor sports injuries, sometimes blood pressure problems due to stress. Nothing out of the ordinary." But his fingers were nervously fingering the edge of the medical chart, and Nora noticed. After lunch, Ray took her to his house to meet the family, as he put it. The Coleman house was located in a quiet suburb, a neat 2-story detached house with a white fence and a well-kept lawn. A typical middle-class American dream. Janet Coleman met them at the door. A 42-year-old woman with soft features and tired eyes. She worked as a nurse at the city hospital. She was dressed in her home clothes, and it was clear that she had just woken up after a night shift. "Honey, this is Detective Taylor," Ray introduced her. "She's conducting an investigation at the prison." "Nice to meet you," Janet said politely, but Nora noticed how the woman avoided her gaze. "Sorry about the mess. I just got home from work." The house was cool. The air conditioner was on full blast. Family photos hung on the walls. Ray and Janet at their wedding 15 years ago. Their trips together. Ray's awards for service. The perfect family idyll. "Ray is very dedicated to his work," Janet said, handing her a cold lemonade. "Sometimes I joke that he's more married to the prison than he is to me." Ray laughed, but it sounded a little forced. "Work is work. Someone has to keep order." "How do you cope with such responsibility?" Nora asked. "It can't be easy managing hundreds of prisoners." "I have a great team," Ray replied, "and I believe you have to speak to people in a language they understand. Prisoners respect strength. Show weakness and you lose control." Janet grimaced slightly at these words, but said nothing. That evening, on her way back to the station, Nora reflected on her day. Formally, everything looked perfect. A clean prison, disciplined inmates, professional staff. But something bothered her. Too much was left unsaid, too many cautious glances. The anonymous complaint that had brought her to Pinewood was brief. "Something is wrong in this prison. The guards are abusing their power. The inmates are afraid to speak." There was no signature, but the handwriting was neat and educated. Nora opened Marcus Gray's personal file. 34 years old, history teacher at Miller High School. Unmarried, parents deceased, no close relatives. Prior to his arrest, he had an impeccable reputation and was beloved by his students and colleagues. An accident changed everything. She reviewed his medical records for the past year. Several visits to Dr. Park, complaints of insomnia, headaches, depression. Standard problems for a prisoner serving a long sentence. But there were 2 more visits, marked as injury from a fall and bruised ribs. The dates, March and May of this year. Nora frowned. Maybe it was nothing. Prison wasn't a health resort. But her intuition told her that something wasn't right. She planned to return to Pinewood the next day to examine the paperwork in more detail. Ray had already agreed to show her all the necessary reports. Too helpful for someone who was supposed to protect the interests of his institution. Nora turned off the lights in her office and headed for the exit. Outside, the summer night promised to be muggy and restless. Somewhere within the gray walls of Pinewood Prison, people were trying to sleep in cramped cells, while air conditioners fought the July heat. She didn't know yet that in 3 weeks, one of them would no longer have to worry about the heat. Marcus woke up at 4 in the morning to the sound of a metal door. The cell was stuffy, despite the humming fan. The July heat penetrated even the thick walls of Pinewood, turning the nights into a test of endurance. He lay on the narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about the dream he had been having every night for 3 years. Rain, a slippery road, a small figure running out from behind a parked car, the screech of brakes, a crash. Marcus sat up on the edge of his bunk and rubbed his face with his hands. The prison therapist said that the guilt would dull over time, but so far that hadn't happened. Every morning he woke up with the same weight on his chest, with the same question: why couldn't I stop sooner? Breakfast in the cafeteria was the same as usual. Marcus sat in the corner with a book, trying not to attract attention. In 3 years, he had learned the most important rule of prison survival: stay invisible. Read, work in the library, don't get involved in other people's conflicts. But lately, it had become increasingly difficult. "Gray, come here," he heard a familiar voice say. Ray Coleman stood at the entrance to the dining hall, pretending to check that everything was in order. But Marcus knew that look, cold and appraising. The guard had started paying attention to him a few months ago. At first, it was casual conversation, questions about his life before prison and how he was coping with incarceration. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, moving closer. "How are things in the library? Are the inmates happy with the education program?" "Everything's fine. Attendance is steady." Ray nodded, but his eyes studied Marcus too closely. "Good. Come see me in my office after lunch. We need to discuss some new educational materials." Marcus felt a familiar uneasiness. These discussions in the office had begun a month ago. Ray talked about plans to expand the educational programs and how much he valued Marcus's work. But there was something in his tone, in the way he stood too close, in the way his hand sometimes touched Marcus's shoulder. In the library, Marcus tried to concentrate on his work. He was helping a young inmate with a math textbook when he noticed Dr. Park in the doorway. The doctor looked at him with obvious concern. "Mr. Gray, could you come to the infirmary?" "We need to check on that bruise," the doctor said. Marcus knew the bruise had healed long ago. But he also understood that Dr. Park was the only person in the prison who treated the inmates like human beings, not numbers. In the medical office, the doctor closed the door and turned up the fan. "Marcus," he began quietly, "I've noticed that you often seem tense. Is there something you'd like to talk about? Whatever you say will stay between us." Marcus hesitated. Dr. Park was a kind man, but he was still part of the system, and informants were not popular in prison. "Everything's fine, doctor, it's just the heat getting to me." Dr. Park studied his face as if trying to read his thoughts. "Marcus, if someone is forcing you to do something you don't want to do, you have to tell us. We have procedures to protect prisoners." "Procedures?" Marcus smiled bitterly. "Doctor, you know how things work here. Official complaints are handled by the prison administration, and the prison administration is Ray Coleman." Dr. Park lowered his eyes. He knew Marcus was right. At that moment, Janet Coleman sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since grown cold. She had just returned from the night shift at the hospital, but sleep would not come. Lately, sleep had been elusive. 15 years of marriage had taught her to read her husband's moods. Ray was different. He wasn't the man she had married. Back then, he was an ambitious young officer who dreamed of a career in law enforcement. Prison was a stepping stone to something bigger, but the years at Pinewood had changed him. He had become harder, more cynical. At home, he could be an attentive husband, but sometimes Janet caught a cold, predatory look in his eyes. Yesterday, she accidentally saw a message on his phone. "We need to talk. Seriously." From someone named M. Ray quickly deleted the message, saying it was just an inmate with a question about the library. But Janet knew that prisoners didn't have access to cell phones. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Nora Taylor was standing on the doorstep. "Mrs. Coleman, I'm sorry to bother you so early. I have a few more questions about your husband's work." Janet invited the detective in. The house was cool. Ray had always insisted on powerful air conditioning. "Comfort costs money," he used to say. "Your husband mentioned that he works with educational programs for prisoners," Nora began. "How often does he stay late for that?" "Quite often," Janet replied, pouring coffee. "Especially in the last few months. He says he's helping an inmate, a former teacher, adjust to prison life." Nora raised an eyebrow. "A former teacher?" "Yes, some guy named Gray. Ray says he's been struggling with depression since what he did. The man killed a child in a car accident." "And your husband is personally involved in his case?" Janet nodded, but something in her expression changed. "Ray has always been dedicated to his work, sometimes too dedicated." "What do you mean?" Janet was silent for a long time, as if weighing her words. "Detective Taylor, are you married?" "Divorced." "Then you'll understand. When you live with someone for 15 years, you can sense when something changes. Ray has become different, more secretive. He used to talk about his work, complain about difficult inmates, share his plans. Now he just says everything's fine." "Is there anything specific that concerns you?" Janet stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the well-manicured lawn. "Last month he came home with a scratch on his arm. He said one of the inmates had attacked him, but when I asked if he had filed a report, he got angry. He told me to mind my own business." Nora made notes in her notebook. "Mrs. Coleman, if you have any suspicions about your husband's behavior—" "I don't have suspicions," Janet interrupted quickly. "I have fears, and I don't know what to do about them." After lunch, Marcus headed to the administrative section of the prison. Ray's office was at the end of the corridor, a spacious room with windows overlooking the courtyard. On the walls hung diplomas, certificates of appreciation, and photographs from official events. "Come in, Marcus," Ray said, closing the door behind him. "Sit down." Marcus remained standing. "I told you to sit down," Ray repeated, a steely note creeping into his voice. Marcus reluctantly sat down on a chair in front of the desk. Ray walked around the desk and stood next to him, too close. "You know, Marcus, I've been thinking a lot about your situation. 8 years is a long time. especially for someone as educated as you. Marcus remained silent, staring at the floor. But there are ways to make your time more comfortable. A private cell, access to the best books, the opportunity to teach. I can arrange a lot for someone who understands how the system works. Ray placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. The touch was heavy, possessive. On the other hand, life can be very difficult for those who don't value friendship. Transfers to harsher blocks, problems with other inmates, loss of privileges. Marcus looked up. There was something predatory in Ray's face, something that made his stomach clench with disgust. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said quietly. Ray grinned and squeezed Marcus's shoulder harder. "Smart boy, you understand perfectly." At that moment, there was a knock on the door. "Mr. Coleman, this is Dr. Park. I need to discuss some urgent medical matters." Ray cursed under his breath and stepped away from Marcus. "We'll continue this conversation later," he whispered. "Think about what I said." That evening, Nora sat in her office, studying documents. The case was becoming increasingly complicated. Officially, there had been no complaints about inappropriate behavior by staff at Pinewood Prison in the last 2 years. But medical records showed a growing number of accidents among inmates. Falls, fights, carelessness at work. The name of Dr. Park appeared particularly often in these records, and even more frequently, the name Marcus Gray. The phone rang, an unknown number. "Hello? Detective Taylor?" The voice was quiet and nervous. "This is Marcus Gray. I'm calling from prison. I have 1 minute." "Marcus, how did you get access to a phone?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you need to know the truth about what's going on at Pinewood, about what Ray Coleman is doing." The line crackled with static. "Marcus, are you there? I can't talk long, but if anything happens to me, if I end up in the hospital or worse, know that it wasn't an accident." "Marcus, wait!" Beeps. The line went dead. Nora looked at her watch. It was 9:30 in the evening. Lights out in the prison long ago. How did Marcus get access to a phone? And why did he risk it, knowing that all calls were recorded? The answer was obvious. Because he was afraid that tomorrow might be too late. The morning of the 3rd day of the investigation began with an alarming phone call. Nora had just entered the station when the sergeant on duty informed her of an incident at Pinewood. An inmate named Tommy Welch was found in his cell with a broken nose and a concussion, the sergeant reported. The official story is that he fell out of bed during a seizure, but the emergency doctor has his doubts. Nora grabbed her car keys. A seizure didn't explain the injuries the doctor had described. This was a beating. In the Pinewood infirmary, Dr. Park looked even more alarmed than usual. His hands were shaking as he showed Nora the x-rays. "Broken nose, mild concussion, multiple bruises on the torso," he listed. "Tommy claims he fell, but the injuries are not consistent with falling from a bed." "Where is Mr. Welch now?" "In solitary confinement, at his own request." The doctor lowered his voice. "Detective Taylor, I need to tell you something, but not here." They met an hour later at a cafe outside the city. Dr. Park smoked, a habit he had picked up during his years working in prisons, although he had never smoked before. "I've been working in the prison system for 20 years, he began, staring out the window. "I've seen a lot. I know prison isn't a resort. But what's been happening these past few months?" He took a drag on his cigarette. "Detective, some inmates come to me with injuries they can't explain, or they give unconvincing explanations. Bruises on their wrists, scratches on their backs, signs of coercion. Coercion to what? To things that aren't talked about in polite society." Dr. Park stubbed out his cigarette. "I don't have any hard evidence. No one complains officially. Everyone is afraid." "What about Marcus Gray?" The doctor's face darkened. "Marcus has become a target. Educated, intelligent, vulnerable because of his guilt, the perfect victim for a predator. You think Ray Coleman?" "I don't believe anything officially," the doctor interrupted. "But as a doctor, I see signs of prolonged stress in Marcus. Insomnia, weight loss, depression, and most importantly, fear. He's afraid of certain people, certain situations." Nora took notes. "Doctor, why did you decide to speak up now?" "Because last night Marcus asked me to prescribe him a sleeping pill. a strong one. When I asked him why, he said he wanted to sleep forever. The doctor lit another cigarette. Detective, I'm afraid we're losing him. Meanwhile, in the administrative wing of the prison, Ray Coleman was studying the phone records. The monitoring system had recorded Marcus's call from yesterday, but the quality of the recording was poor due to interference. Ray couldn't make out what the inmate was saying, but the number he had called belonged to Detective Taylor. Ray leaned back in his chair. Marcus was crossing the line. It was time to remind him of the rules of the game. He called for guard Jack Stone, a young officer who had been working at the prison for only 2 years. Jack was ambitious and didn't ask unnecessary questions. Stone, I need you to keep an eye on inmate Gray. Number 247. I have reason to believe he's planning a violation. What kind of violation, sir? Possibly an escape attempt or an attack on staff. Keep him under close observation, and if you see anything suspicious, report it immediately. Jack nodded. His eyes showed his desire to curry favor with his superiors. After lunch, Nora decided to talk to Ray's wife again. Janet Coleman met her at the hospital where she worked in the emergency room. They found a quiet corner in the cafeteria. Mrs. Coleman, I want to ask you a direct question. Do you suspect your husband of inappropriate behavior toward the inmates? Janet was silent for a long time, stirring her coffee. Detective, whatever I suspect, he's my husband, the father of my future children. Future? We've been trying to have a baby for 5 years, Janet said quietly. Ray really wants a son. He says he wants to pass on the family tradition of service. And you? Janet looked up. I'm afraid of what kind of father he'll be. He's become tougher lately, more cynical. Sometimes, when he thinks I'm not looking, he has a look on his face that scares me. What kind of look? Like a man who's used to getting what he wants, by any means necessary. That evening, Nora returned to the prison under the pretext of finishing checking the paperwork. Ray greeted her with a professional smile, but his eyes betrayed his wariness. Detective, I hope you found our cooperation satisfactory. We're always open to dialogue with law enforcement. Of course. By the way, I need to talk to a few more inmates. Marcus Gray in particular. Ray tensed for a moment. Unfortunately, Mr. Gray is in the infirmary today. He's feeling a little under the weather. Is it serious? No, just a precaution. You know, the summer heat affects some inmates' mental state. Nora nodded, but mentally noted that Ray hadn't offered to let her talk to Marcus in the infirmary. What about Tommy Welch? I heard he had an accident. Yes, a very unfortunate incident. He fell out of his bunk during a seizure. Fortunately, nothing serious. A seizure? Does Mr. Welch have epilepsy? Ray hesitated. You'll have to check with Dr. Park. I'm not a medical expert. In the infirmary, Nora found Marcus in a small ward. He was lying on a cot, staring at the ceiling. When he saw the detective, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Mr. Gray, how are you feeling? Bad, he replied honestly. Very bad. Nora sat down on a chair next to the cot. Marcus, that phone call yesterday? I didn't call, he said quickly, glancing at the door. I don't have access to a phone. But the voice. Detective, please. His voice sounded pleading. Don't make me say anything that could make my life even worse. Nora leaned closer. Marcus, if someone is threatening you or forcing you to do something, I can help. But I need facts. Marcus closed his eyes. Facts? The fact is, I'm a murderer. The fact is, I deserve to be punished. And everything else is just part of that punishment. That's not true, and you know it. Marcus opened his eyes and looked at her bitterly. Detective, do you know what it's like to live with guilt? To wake up every day and remember that a child died because of you? Do you know what a person is capable of when they believe they deserve any punishment? Nora felt her heart tighten. Marcus was broken not only by prison, but by his own conscience. Marcus, that child died in an accident. Rain, poor visibility. I was driving, he interrupted. I should have been more careful. I should have. The cell door opened. Guard Stone stood in the doorway. Detective Taylor, Mr. Coleman requests your presence in his office. It's urgent. Nora stood up, but before leaving, she leaned toward Marcus. This isn't over, she whispered. A surprise awaited her in Ray's office. Sitting at the desk was a man in a suit, the head of the state prison system, Robert Harris. "Detective Taylor," Harris stood up. "Ray told me about your investigation. I came here to make sure you have all the information you need." "Of course. Although the investigation is not yet complete." "In what sense?" Harris asked, exchanging glances with Ray. "There are some discrepancies in the medical records, evidence of possible abuse." "Detective," Harris interrupted, "I personally reviewed Pinewood's statistics for the last 2 years. We have one of the lowest complaint rates in the state. No official violations by staff. It's a model facility." "But an anonymous complaint?" "Anonymous complaints often come from disgruntled inmates," Ray said. "People who are trying to discredit the system out of revenge." Nora realized she was trapped. The system was protecting itself. "Gentlemen, I understand your position, but I have a duty to the law. And no one is questioning your commitment to the law," Harris said. "But sometimes jealousy can cloud judgment. I hear you're divorced after your ex-husband cheated on you with a colleague." Nora felt the blood rush to her face. They had looked into her personal life. "My personal circumstances are irrelevant to the case." "Of course," Harris agreed. "But psychologists say that people who have been traumatized by betrayal sometimes see betrayal where there is none." This was war. They were trying to discredit her as an investigator. "Gentlemen, I thank you for your cooperation, but the investigation will continue." As she left the prison, Nora felt that she was being watched. Ray and Harris were standing in the window of the administration building watching her leave. Late that evening, already at home, Nora received another call from an unknown number. "Detective Taylor?" The voice was unfamiliar. "Young." "Yes." "My name is Jack Stone. I work as a guard at Pinewood. I need to meet with you. I have information about what's going on in the prison." "Where?" "Tomorrow at 7 in the morning, the Mill Street Cafe. And come alone, detective. If Coleman finds out I spoke to you, I'm a dead man." The line went dead. Nora sat down in her chair, thinking about the day's events. The system was cracking. Someone on the inside was ready to talk. But she also knew that the stakes were getting higher. Ray Coleman and his backers were no longer interested in playing games. Outside, another muggy summer night was falling. Somewhere in a cell at Pinewood Prison, Marcus Gray lay awake, knowing that tomorrow could be the most important day of his life. And in his home, Ray Coleman was planning how to silence once and for all anyone who could destroy his world. The morning of the 4th day promised to be the hottest of the week. At 7 o'clock, the thermometer was already showing 35 degrees, and the weather service warned that it could reach 40 degrees by noon. At Pinewood Prison, the air conditioning was working at full capacity, but even that couldn't cope with the suffocating heat that seemed to penetrate every crack in the old building. Nora arrived at the Mill Street Cafe 15 minutes before the appointed time. The place was almost empty. Just her, a sleepy waitress, and an old man reading the morning paper. At 7:07, Jack Stone appeared. The young guard looked exhausted. His usually neat uniform was rumpled, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He looked around nervously before sitting down in the far corner of the cafe, his back against the wall. "Detective, I don't know where to start," he said, taking a cup of coffee with trembling hands. "What I'm about to tell you could ruin a lot of lives." "Start with what you saw with your own eyes," Nora said gently. Jack took a deep breath. 3 months ago, Coleman assigned me to keep a close eye on several prisoners. He said they were potentially dangerous. Among them was Marcus Gray. He paused, gathering his thoughts. "At first, I thought it was just a routine job, but gradually I realized that Coleman was selecting a certain type of inmate. Loners, with no influential relatives, often with feelings of guilt or depression, people who wouldn't complain." "And what did you see?" "Coleman calls them into his office or into the back rooms under various pretexts. Sometimes it lasts half an hour. When they come out," Jack fell silent. "They look like something's happened to them. They haven't been beaten. There are no marks, but something else." Nora took notes, trying not to pressure the young man. "Jack, have you ever seen what exactly happens during these meetings?" "Not directly, but yesterday." He paused, rubbing his face with his hands. "Yesterday, I was supposed to guard the hallway outside Coleman's office. He was there with Gray, and I heard, "What did you hear?" Gray was asking him to stop. His voice sounded desperate, and Coleman was saying something about choices and consequences. Jack stood up and walked over to the window. "Detective, I took this job to serve the law. My father was a police officer. But what am I supposed to do when my boss, when the system—" "You're doing the right thing by telling me this," Nora said. "But I need more concrete evidence. I have the shift logs for when these meetings took place. And," Jack hesitated, "and I have a key to the storage room in the basement. Coleman sometimes takes prisoners there. He says it's more confidential." Nora felt her pulse quicken. "Jack, I want you to be extra vigilant today. If you see anything suspicious—" "Coleman called Gray again today," Jack interrupted. "At 2 o'clock. Said he needed to discuss his behavior." The atmosphere in the prison was oppressive. The heat made everyone irritable. The prisoners wandered listlessly through the corridors, the guards constantly wiped sweat from their brows, and the ventilation system hummed at full capacity. Even in the administrative section, where the air conditioners were working, the air was stale and heavy. Marcus spent the morning in the library, trying to concentrate on cataloging new arrivals. But his thoughts kept returning to his upcoming meeting with Ray. Over the past few weeks, these conversations had become increasingly aggressive, and the demands increasingly humiliating. Dr. Park entered the library around noon. He looked concerned. "Marcus, how are you feeling?" "Fine," Marcus replied automatically, without looking up from the catalog cards. "Listen," the doctor said, sitting down next to him and lowering his voice. "If you need help, medical or otherwise, I can try to arrange something." Marcus finally looked up. The doctor saw something in his eyes that frightened him. Cold determination. "Thank you, doctor. But I think today will be the end." "What do you mean?" "Everyone has their limit," Marcus said quietly, "and I've found mine." At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Ray Coleman walked down the hallway toward the library with a satisfied look on his face. That morning, he had received a call from his boss. Detective Taylor was being transferred to another case, and the investigation at Pinewood was officially closed. No violations had been found. This meant that he could once again conduct his investigations in his own way. "Gray, let's go," he said, appearing in the library doorway. Marcus slowly stood up, putting aside the index cards. Several other inmates working in the library quickly averted their eyes. Everyone knew what was happening, but no one dared to intervene. "Where are we going?" Marcus asked. "To the basement. We need to check the condition of the archive materials." It was a lie, and they both knew it. There was nothing in the archive that required the presence of an inmate. They descended the stairs to the basement of the prison. It was even hotter here. The ventilation was barely working, and the concrete walls accumulated heat. The corridor was lit by dim light bulbs, most of which were flickering or not working at all. The storage room was at the far end of the corridor. It was a small, windowless room where old documents, abandoned equipment, and all sorts of junk were stored. It was the perfect place for things that no one was supposed to see. Ray unlocked the door and turned on the light. The single light bulb on the ceiling cast a dim yellow glow on the randomly stacked boxes and old furniture. "Come in," Ray ordered. Marcus hesitated at the doorway. Things had happened in this room that he couldn't tell anyone about. Things that made him hate himself even more than he already hated himself for the death of his child. "I said, come in." Marcus crossed the threshold. Ray locked the door and turned to face him. "Well, Marcus, how's it going? I hear you've been talking to our detective." "I haven't." "Don't lie to me," Ray barked, taking a step forward. "You think I don't know about that phone call? You think I'm stupid?" The heat in the small room was unbearable. Sweat dripped down both men's faces. The air was stifling, thick with the smell of dust and fear. "Ray, please," Marcus began. "Please?" Ray sneered. "You'll be begging for something else soon." He began to unbuckle his belt. "You know what I like most about you, Marcus? It's that you understand that you deserve everything that's happening to you. A child murderer has no right to complain." Something clicked in Marcus's mind. Months of humiliation, fear, and self-loathing had reached boiling point. He couldn't take it anymore. "No," he said quietly. "What?" "I said no." Marcus looked up, and Ray saw something new in his eyes. Not submission, but rage. "Enough!" Ray was taken aback by the unexpected response. In all those months, Marcus had never once resisted. "You son of a bitch!" Ray stepped forward, swinging for a punch. At that moment, something inside Marcus snapped. Everything, the guilt, the fear, the submission, was gone, leaving only pure, white rage. He dodged the blow and grabbed the first thing he could find, a heavy metal rod from an old shelf. "You forgot your place!" Ray growled, trying to grab Marcus. But Marcus was faster. 3 years in prison had taught him how to survive. He swung and hit Ray in the head. The blow wasn't too hard, but Ray stumbled and fell, hitting the back of his head on the metal edge of an old cabinet. There was a dull thud, and Ray slumped to the floor. For a few seconds, there was complete silence in the storage room. Only the hum of the ventilation somewhere in the walls and Marcus's heavy breathing could be heard. Ray lay motionless. A dark puddle slowly spread from under his head. Marcus knelt down next to the body, still clutching the metal pin. He couldn't believe what had happened. He, who had already killed one man, had killed another. But strangely, he felt no guilt. There was only emptiness and relief. He checked his pulse. Ray was dead. Marcus stood up and looked around. He had to think. In prison, he faced the death penalty for killing a guard. But in this stuffy room, standing over the body of his tormentor, he felt freer than he had in the last 3 years. He wiped the pin on an old rag and put it back among the trash. Then he carefully moved Ray's body to make it look like an accident. A fall onto the sharp edge of the cabinet. The keys to the cell lay next to the body. Marcus picked them up, trying not to leave any fingerprints, and unlocked the door. The corridor was empty. He went upstairs, keeping the keys in his handkerchief, and threw them into a trash can at the opposite end of the prison. Then he returned to the library and continued working on the catalog as if nothing had happened. An hour later, Dr. Park came in to check on him. "Marcus, you look better. Has something changed?" "Yes," Marcus replied without looking up from the cards. "Something has changed." At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, one of the inmates working in the basement discovered the body. His cries attracted the guards. Guard Stone was the first to arrive. Seeing Ray, he immediately called for medical assistance and the police. Dr. Park arrived a few minutes later. He examined the body and pronounced him dead from a traumatic brain injury. "Looks like an accident," he told Stone. He slipped, fell, and hit his head on the cabinet. But deep down, the doctor had his doubts. Ray was a cautious man. What was he doing in a cluttered storage room? By 5 o'clock in the evening, news of the senior guard's death had spread throughout the prison. Reactions ranged from shock to poorly concealed relief. Marcus greeted the news with surprise that seemed entirely genuine to everyone. "What a tragedy," he said to Dr. Park. "He seemed like such a cautious man." "Yes," agreed the doctor, studying Marcus's face closely. "Very strange." Detective Nora Taylor received a call about the death at 5:30. She rushed to the prison, feeling that she was missing something important. It couldn't be a coincidence. Not now, when the investigation was so close to the truth. In the storage room, she carefully examined the scene. Officially, it looked like an accident, but her experience told her otherwise. "What was Mr. Coleman doing here?" she asked Stone. "I don't know. Maybe checking the archives." "Alone?" "Apparently." Nora examined the metal cabinet with its sharp edge. Yes, falling on it could have caused fatal injuries. But why was Ray here? And why today, when she was so close to the truth? In the evening, after the body had been taken to the morgue and the storage room sealed, the prison was plunged into an unusual silence. Ray's death changed everything: the atmosphere, the balance of power, the future of the investigation. In his cell, Marcus lay on his bunk, feeling something like peace for the first time in months. Yes, he had killed a man. Again. But this time, it was someone who deserved it. He had no regrets, and that didn't scare him. Outside the prison walls, the summer night brought welcome coolness. But in cell number 247, the man who had taken 2 lives slept more soundly than he had in the last 3 years. The murder investigation would begin in the morning, but tonight belonged to him and his secret. The autopsy began at 8 o'clock the next morning. Miller County Medical Examiner Dr. Elizabeth Chen was a meticulous woman who in her 20 years on the job had learned not to trust the obvious. Nora stood next to the metal table, watching the procedure. "Cause of death, massive traumatic brain injury," Dr. Chen commented as she examined the wound. "Blunt force trauma with a sharp edge, consistent with a fall onto a metal cabinet." But Nora detected a hint of doubt in the expert's voice. "But the angle of the blow is strange. If he fell backward as assumed, the wound should be higher and at a different angle." The doctor pointed to the back of the deceased's head. "It looks more like a blow from the side." "You mean?" "Either he fell very badly or he was hit with something and then moved to the cabinet." Nora felt her pulse quicken. Her suspicions were confirmed. "There's something else. There are fabric fibers under the victim's fingernails. They're gray, similar to prison uniforms." The atmosphere in the prison was tense. Ray's assistant, Captain David Morris, a man of retirement age who preferred quiet work with documents to active management, was appointed acting chief. He met Nora in the office that had belonged to Ray just yesterday. "Detective, this is a terrible tragedy. Ray was a pillar of our institution." Nora did not comment on this statement. "I need to talk to everyone who saw Mr. Coleman on the day of his death. Let's start with the prisoners he called to see him." Morris hesitated. "Actually, we don't have any records of who he called yesterday. Ray kept his own appointment book." "And where is that book?" "We haven't found it." Nora questioned Marcus Gray first. He was sitting in the attorney's conference room, calm and focused. In the 3 days since their last conversation, he seemed to have changed. His nervousness was gone, replaced by a kind of inner confidence. "Mr. Gray, where were you yesterday between 2 and 4 in the afternoon?" "In the library, working on the new arrivals catalog." "Who can confirm that?" "Several inmates who work there. Tommy Welch, for example." Nora noted the name, the same Welch who had been beaten up a few days ago. "Mr. Gray, did you meet with Mr. Coleman yesterday?" Marcus paused for a moment. Too long for a simple answer. "No, I didn't see him." "He didn't call for you?" "No." Nora studied his face. Marcus was lying, but he did so calmly, without the usual signs of nervousness. "Mr. Gray, you do understand that the murder of a prison guard is a crime punishable by death, don't you?" "Of course I do. But what does that have to do with me?" "You are one of the few inmates who had a motive to hate Mr. Coleman." For the first time, Marcus's eyes flashed with emotion. Surprise. "A motive?" "Detective, Ray Coleman was a professional prison guard. Yes, he was strict but fair. Why would I hate him?" Nora realized he wasn't going to confess. At least not now. Tommy Welch confirmed Marcus's alibi, but reluctantly. The young prisoner was clearly afraid of something, constantly looking around. "Yes, Gray was in the library all day. We worked next to each other." "Did he leave at any point?" "I don't remember." "Mr. Welch, a few days ago you were involved in an accident. Would you like to tell us what really happened?" Tommy turned pale. "I fell off my bunk. With a broken nose and a concussion? I had convulsions." Nora could see that the boy was lying, but there was no point in pressing him. The fear was too deep. Dr. Park met her in the medical wing. He looked tired but less tense than he had in recent days. "Doctor, what can you tell me about Marcus Gray's mental state?" "Interesting question. For the past few months, he's been suffering from depression, insomnia, signs of post-traumatic stress. But this morning when I saw him, what? He seemed calm, for the first time in a long time, like a man who had finally made a difficult decision." "What decision?" Dr. Park shrugged. "I don't know. But something has definitely changed." Nora spent the rest of the day questioning the prison staff. The picture gradually became clearer, and she didn't like it. Guardstone confirmed that Ray did indeed have a habit of calling certain inmates for private conversations, but no one knew the details of these meetings. He said it was part of the rehabilitation program. individual work with problem cases. And the storage room in the basement? Ray sometimes took inmates there. He said it was quieter there, a place to talk heart to heart. By evening, Nora realized she had a suspect, a motive, and circumstantial evidence. But there was no hard evidence. She decided to go for broke. The next morning, she called Marcus in for questioning again. This time, she had a recording device with her. "Mr. Gray, I want to tell you what we know about Mr. Coleman." Marcus listened silently as Nora presented the results of her investigation: coercion of prisoners, abuse of power, systematic bullying. "You see, Mr. Gray, we know that you were one of his victims. We know that he forced you to do things that went against your moral principles." Marcus remained silent. "We also know that on the day of Mr. Coleman's death, fibers matching the prison uniforms were found on his body." Finally, Marcus looked up. "And what does that mean?" "It means that one of the prisoners had physical contact with him shortly before his death." "Detective," Marcus said calmly, "are you trying to accuse me of murder based on fabric fibers? Everyone in prison wears the same uniform." "There's something else." Nora opened the folder. "Medical records show that in recent months you have visited Dr. Park with injuries that did not match your explanation of how they were sustained." "I'm clumsy." "And there is also the testimony of Guard Stone, who said he heard your voice coming from Mr. Coleman's office, the voice of a man asking him to stop." For the first time, Marcus showed signs of agitation. "Detective, even if we assume that everything you're saying is true, even if Ray Coleman really was who you think he was, doesn't his death make the world a little bit better? That's not for you to decide, Mr. Gray." "Then whose is it? The system that covered for him? The higher-ups who turned a blind eye to what was going on?" Marcus leaned forward. "Detective, how many more people had to suffer while you were gathering evidence?" Nora realized he was close to confessing. "Marcus, I understand what you've been through, but murder..." "Murder?" he interrupted. "I'm already a murderer, Detective. And you know what? The kid I ran over was innocent. And Ray Coleman..." He fell silent, realizing he had said too much. "Go on," Nora said gently. Marcus was silent for a long time. Then he spoke slowly. "He called me to the storage room. He said we needed to talk about my behavior, but we both knew why I was there." Nora turned on the recorder. "Tell me everything in order." "He locked the door. He started to unbuckle his belt. He said I deserved whatever punishment I got because I killed a child." Marcus's voice trembled. And at that moment, something inside me broke. I couldn't take it anymore. "What happened next?" "He tried to hit me. I dodged and grabbed a metal pin from an old shelf. I didn't want to kill him, I was just defending myself." "But you hit him?" "Yes, once. He fell and hit his head on the wardrobe." Marcus looked at Nora. "I checked his pulse. He was dead. And then I tried to make it look like an accident. I moved the body, wiped the pin, took the keys, and went back to the library." Nora stopped recording. "Mr. Gray, you do realize that you just confessed to murder?" "Yes." Marcus looked strangely calm. "And you know what, Detective? I don't regret it. For the first time in 3 years, I don't regret what I did." An hour later, Marcus Gray was officially arrested on suspicion of murder. He was transferred to another prison. He couldn't stay at Pinewood anymore. Nora sat in Captain Morris's office, filling out paperwork. Outside, the sun was setting, ending the hottest week of the summer. "Detective, what will happen to our investigation into the abuse?" Morris asked. "It will continue. Mr. Coleman's death does not negate the crimes he committed, but the main witness is now accused of murder. Who will believe the testimony of a murderer?" Nora knew he was right. The case against the corrupt Pinewood system had collapsed with Ray's death. The next day, she met with the district attorney. The elderly man listened to her story with a stony face. "Detective Taylor, we have a confession to murder. That's good work. But what about the other charges?" "Ray Coleman systematically abused inmates. We have medical records, testimony. We have testimony from people who have reasons to lie. And the key witness just confessed to murdering the man he's accused of killing. But, Detective, Ray Coleman is dead. He can't defend himself against the charges. and his family shouldn't suffer from unproven rumors. Nora realized that the system was protecting itself again. Marcus Gray's trial took place 4 months later. The autumn air was cool, a distant memory of the stifling summer heat in which it all began. Nora was present at the trial as a witness for the prosecution. Marcus looked calm, almost peaceful. His lawyer tried to build a defense based on temporary insanity and self-defense, but the facts were against them. Janet Coleman sat in the front row. She had lost weight and aged, but she carried herself with dignity. During the recess, she approached Nora. "Detective, I want you to know that after Ray died, I found some things. Photos, documents. You were right in your suspicions. Why didn't you turn them over to the court?" Janet smiled sadly. "Because it won't change anything. Ray is dead, and I want to try to move on with my life." The jury reached a verdict after 2 days of deliberation. Guilty of second-degree murder. 25 years in prison without parole. Marcus listened to the sentence without emotion. As he was led away, he caught Nora's eye for a moment. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. Nora didn't know what he was thanking her for. 6 months later, Pinewood Prison was closed for renovation. Officially, it was because of outdated equipment and the need for modernization. Unofficially, it was because there were too many inconvenient questions. The inmates were transferred to other facilities. Dr. Park retired. Guardstone got a job with the police. Justice prevailed, but at what cost? 1 dead pervert, 1 man in prison for life, and a system that continued to function as if nothing had happened. Marcus Gray served his sentence in a maximum security prison 300 miles from home. He worked in the library, taught literacy to other inmates, and read. He lived quietly and unobtrusively, and he had no regrets. Because some people deserve to die, and some murders are justice that came too late, but came nonetheless. In the end, he was a teacher, and he taught Ray Coleman his last lesson.